The tires were screaming, a high-pitched wail that echoed off the damp brick walls of the alleyway as I took a corner so sharp I felt the two right wheels of my beat-up sedan leave the pavement. But all I could think about was the heavy gym bag in the passenger seat, and the fact that if I didn't make this light, my life was effectively over. I could see the blue and red strobes reflecting in every rearview mirror, a rhythmic, pulsing reminder that I was now exactly what I never thought I'd be. A criminal on the run with a city's worth of sirens behind me. Just 3 hours ago, I was a high school track star with a clean record and a scholarship on the horizon. But now, I'm the lead in a high-speed chase through the heart of the city with a bag full of cash that isn't mine. I have to ask you right now, before I get into how this nightmare started. If you were looking at your family losing everything, if you saw your mother crying because the lights were being shut off again, and someone offered you a way out that required you to break every law in the book, would you have taken it? Was I wrong to become a thief to save the only people I love? Or would you have stayed honest, while watching your world crumble? To understand how a 17-year-old kid, known as the fastest sprinter in the state, ended up dodging spike strips and pit maneuvers, you have to understand where I come from. My name is Leo, and for most of my life, my legs were my only ticket out. We lived in a part of town where the sirens were just background noise, but my mom worked 3 jobs to keep me in a decent school and out of the gangs that patrolled our block. I spent every waking hour on the track, pushing my lungs until they burned, because my coach told me that if I could shave another 0.2 of a second off my 100-meter dash, I'd have every Ivy League school in the country begging me to attend. I was the fastest teen, a local celebrity of sorts, the kid who was going to make it. But life has a funny way of tripping you right when you're about to cross the finish line. 6 months ago, my mom got sick. Not the kind of sick you bounce back from in a week, but the kind that requires specialists, expensive medications, and hours away from work. The bills started piling up like a mountain we couldn't climb. First, it was the past due notices in yellow, then the final notice in red, and eventually, the knocking on the door from people who didn't care about my track medals or my GPA. Every single day, I'd come home and see a new piece of her jewelry missing from her dresser. First the wedding ring, then the necklace her father gave her. She was selling her history just to buy us another week of electricity. I remember sitting in the kitchen, the air thick with the smell of cheap noodles, watching her hands tremble as she tried to sign a medical waiver. The woman who had been my rock was eroding right in front of me. My scholarship was only a maybe until the spring season ended, but we didn't have until spring. We had until Friday. I tried to help. I took a job washing dishes at a local diner until 2 a.m., then woke up at 5 a.m. to train, but it was like trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. My grades started slipping because I was falling asleep in calculus, and my coach noticed I was losing my explosive start. He pulled me aside and said, "Leo, you're carrying the world on your shoulders, but you need to leave it at the starting block." If only it were that easy. One night, after a particularly grueling shift where the grease seemed to have seeped into my very pores, I was approached by someone I hadn't seen in years, a guy named Marcus. He used to be on the track team with me until he got expelled for something nobody talked about. He looked different now. He wore expensive clothes and drove a car that cost more than our entire house. He told me he'd been watching my races and that he had a job for someone with my specific set of skills. He didn't need a driver, he needed a runner. Someone who could get into a place, grab a specific item, and get back to the car before the silent alarms even registered at the precinct. I told him no. I told him I wasn't that guy. But then I went home and found my mom sitting in the dark because the power had been cut, her face pale and sunken because she'd skipped her meds to pay for my new running shoes. She had literally sacrificed her health so I could run faster. And yet my speed was doing nothing to help her. That was the moment Leo the athlete died, and Leo the thief was born. I called Marcus that night from a payphone, my voice shaking. "I'm in," I said. He didn't even sound surprised. Marcus laid out the plan for weeks. It was supposed to be a milk run. A quick hit on a private high-stakes poker game being held in the back of a luxury penthouse. These guys were wealthy, they were playing with untraceable cash, and they couldn't exactly call the cops to report stolen illegal gambling money. My job was simple. Wait for the signal, use the service elevator, sprint through the hallway, grab the bag from the office where they kept the house cut, and be back in Marcus's car in under 60 seconds. My speed was the entire insurance policy. Marcus kept emphasizing that speed was the only thing that mattered. They have guards, Leo, but those guys are built like tanks. They're slow. By the time they stand up from the table, you'll be 3 floors down. I practiced the route in my head 1,000 times. I knew exactly how many strides it took to reach the door, how to pivot on the polished marble floors, and how to lunge for the bag like it was a relay baton. I even went to the building under the guise of a delivery boy just to time the elevator doors. Every second was mapped out. My conscience was screaming at me, telling me that I was throwing away my future. But every time I looked at my mom's empty pill bottles, that voice got quieter. When the night finally came, my heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would break. We pulled up to the curb, Marcus gave me the nod, and I was gone. Everything was a blur of adrenaline and focus. I hit the stairs, burst through the door, and for a second, I felt that familiar rush of the track. I was fast. I was invisible. I grabbed the bag, but as I turned to leave, the door didn't just open, it was kicked in. It wasn't the cops. It was a rival crew who had the same idea we did, but they brought guns. Bullets started shredding the expensive wallpaper, and I did the only thing I knew how to do. I ran. I didn't go back to the elevator. I dove through a side window onto a fire escape, sliding down the metal railings, my skin tearing against the rusted iron. The sound of gunfire was muffled by the wind rushing past my ears. I hit the ground running, my legs pumping with a desperation I had never felt on a synthetic track. I burst into the alley where the getaway car was supposed to be, but Marcus was gone. He'd seen the muzzle flashes and bolted, leaving me alone in the dark with 10 pounds of cash and a death warrant. I could hear the screech of tires from the rival crew's SUV turning into the alley. I was a sitting duck. I found an old car with the keys in the ignition at a nearby valet stand. The attendant had run when the shooting started. And that's when the sirens started. I've been driving for 45 minutes now, weaving through traffic, using every instinct I developed on the track to anticipate the movements of the cars around me. I'm exhausted, I'm terrified, and I'm staring at a blockade of police cruisers a mile ahead. The weight of the bag in the passenger seat feels like lead. There's almost $500,000 in there. It's enough to move us out of the city, get Mom the best doctors in the world, and start over. But it's also enough to get me 20 years in a maximum security prison. So that's the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice that would define the rest of my life. Before I tell you what happened next, how I faced that blockade and the insane way I managed to disappear, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have pulled over and surrendered, hoping for a light sentence because of your circumstances, or would you have stepped on the gas and risked it all for the chance to save your family? I'm reading every single comment, so let me know right now. I looked at the bag in the passenger seat, then back at the flashing lights of the blockade. There was no going back. If I stopped, the money would be seized, I'd go to prison, and my mom would die in an empty house without her medicine. I shifted gears, the engine screaming in protest as I floored it. I didn't head for the gap in the cruisers. I headed for the construction ramp on the side of the bridge. It was a move straight out of a movie, something that shouldn't work in real life. I felt the car launch, the stomach-flipping sensation of weightlessness, as we soared over the first line of police cars. The landing was brutal. The strut snapped, the tires blew, and I skidded into a dark warehouse district, the car smoking and dead. But I was still moving. I grabbed the bag, jumped out of the wreck, and started to do what I was born to do. I ran. I didn't run like a criminal. I ran like I was back on that track, fighting for the gold. I moved through alleys, over fences, and through drainage pipes that smelled of salt and old rain. The cops had the perimeter, but they didn't have my lungs. They didn't have the desperation of a son who refused to let his mother down. I could hear them calling out over megaphones, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like hungry eyes. I found a crawl space under an old pier and waited. I stayed there for hours, the cold water lapping at my feet, clutching that gym bag like a lifesaver. I watched the sun begin to bleed over the horizon, realizing that the Leo who started this race was gone forever. Hours later, I crawled through our back window, covered in grease, blood, and sweat. I hid the bag under the floorboards, showered until the smell of burnt rubber was gone, and sat by my mom's bed. She was still asleep, her breathing shallow but steady. The next morning, the news was full of the phantom thief and the spectacular car crash on the bridge, but they had no name and no face. They assumed the driver had drowned in the river or escaped via a waiting boat. They never looked for a track star with a busted knee. I used the money anonymously to pay off every debt we had, funneling it through a series of charitable donations and anonymous scholarships I set up with the help of a guy Marcus once knew. A disgraced lawyer who didn't ask questions as long as he got his cut. My track career is over. The injury to my leg from the crash ensured I'd never break a record again. I walk with a limp now, a permanent reminder of the night I flew over a bridge. I trade my future for her present. And while I live every day looking over my shoulder, wondering if a knock on the door will be a detective with a warrant, I'd do it all again. I watch my mom now as she walks through the garden of the small house we bought in a different state, her color back, her smile genuine. She thinks I won a specialized athletic lottery or that my investments finally paid off. I let her believe the lie, because the truth would kill her faster than the illness ever could. This story isn't about the thrill of the heist or the adrenaline of the chase. It's about what we are willing to sacrifice when the world gives us no other choice. It's about the thin line between a hero and a villain, and how sometimes you have to be both to survive. I lost my dream of the Olympics, I lost my integrity, and I lost my peace of mind. But I saved my mother. If you think I did the right thing by choosing my family over the law, like this video right now to show your support. If you think I'm just another criminal who got lucky, tell me why in the comments. I want to hear the truth. Do you believe that the end justifies the means? Or is a crime always a crime, regardless of the reason? Make sure to subscribe for more intense, real-life stories that push the limits of what's right and wrong. And share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. I'll be there responding to as many as I can. I'll see you all in the next story.